Hello and welcome to the Breath of Life Art Studios studio. In studio with you today is me, Josh Foreman. And today we're going to be going over, in case you can't read the title, molding, casting, and painting. So let's look at what we're going to be doing. This is a little statue that I'm making, my latest project. This is for a band called Ovid's Withering, and it's kind of going to be part of a limited 100, there's going to be 100 copies of this guy, that's why I have to make a mold and cast him, for kind of a collector's edition sort of thing for their album. Just for a little context, let's listen to it. I mean, the music that was played at the intro is from their album, but most of it sounds more like this.
I have given myself, I belong to the town. Yes, I am.
Yeah, so kind of like a smooth jazz, easy listening kind of thing. It's not everyone's cup of tea. I've heard it described as John Tesh meets Enya. Their album is like a concept album. It takes place in Greek mythology, sort of, and their main character is Pan. So I decided to do my interpretation of this character, going along with the name Withering. I wanted to make them all kind of like decrepit and mummified, no lower jaw, just kind of a gross dead version of Pan. I thought it fit that kind of smooth jazz feel that their album has. So this is the piece that I'm going to be molding, and I'm not going to go into the sculpting part of it. I'm going to be doing a really long, epic, elaborate sculpting tutorial, sculpting, fabricating, tons of different materials and stuff with this guy in the middle of it right now. So, I mean, if you're watching from the future, then I'm sure there'll be a link in the description, and you can go watch that if you're interested in that part of the process. But this is just focus on making molds, casting them, and painting. So let's get started with the molding. The first thing that you need to do to make a mold is to get a container that your statue will fit in. I happen to have this cardboard box, taped up the edges to make sure that stuff doesn't leak out of there. Now, if you go to like the Smooth On website and other fine retailers of this mold making rubber, one thing you'll notice is that they'll put it in a box like this, and then they'll just start pouring rubber in there. And that's a totally valid way to do it. Saves a lot of time. It's great if you have unlimited money, because this urethane rubber stuff, it ain't cheap. So I'm going to show you a way that takes a little bit longer, but it will save a lot of money. You know what? I never really thought about this, but I wonder if maybe one of the reasons that they use so much rubber on those videos is to sell more rubber. No, they wouldn't do that. Okay, anyway, let me show you the way I do it. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cover this sculpture with, well, first with aluminum foil, and then with about a ½ inch of this clean clay. Now the reason that I'm covering it in foil is just so that when I stick the clean clay on there, it's not going to get stuck in the little nooks and crannies, and so I won't have to dig it out afterwards. It doesn't have to be completely form-fitting, but the closer it is, the better your measurements will be when it comes to figuring out how much rubber you're going to need. You know, when I said ½ inch, I lied. You really don't have to make it that thick. Basically, the way you can visualize this is wherever you have clay, that's where rubber is going to be. So the thicker you make it, the more rubber there's going to be on the mold. point out is that you want to make sure you don't have any undercuts. So this is a classic example of an undercut. When the plaster that I'm going to pour on this goes under there, it'll catch on that lip there. So you want to make sure you smooth everything down. So if you're looking straight down on it, there are no occluded areas, no parts that are hidden from your eye. Have it smoothed out, the next thing you have to do is add these little shafts on top that will become the vents that you pour the rubber into. One thing to keep in mind is don't do this. Do not make your pour vents conical in shape, like a funnel, because that's naturally what you would want to do, because you'd think, oh, that gives me a bigger target to pour the rubber in. Problem is, when you do that and then you flip it over and try to pull the rubber out, it's stuck in the plaster like that. So either make them very whatever that word is that means that they're straight, or you could even taper them the other direction so that they flare out a little bit when they hit the surface of the clay. The height of these pour spouts needs to be basically just higher than whatever the highest point on the sculpture is. In this case, it's his nose, and since it was covered with clay, I know that's the highest point on the clay. So you want to make it just go a little bit higher than that. Now, one thing you may be wondering is why not just make one pour spout? And the reason typically is you want to be able to visually see, because there's going to be plaster over this whole thing, like a solid block of it. So you cannot see into it except where you put these things. So sometimes you might have a concern that your rubber is setting up faster than you anticipated, and so you don't know if it got all the way in there. Sometimes you might have it tilted weird or something, so bubbles might be forming. And so basically, the more of these you have, it's like insurance. The safer you are against that sort of accident happening. Of course, just like insurance, it costs money. The more of these you have, the more rubber you're using, the more expensive it is. So you have to play it by ear with each piece. And the final tip for this step is when you pour the rubber in, you always want to pour it at the lowest point of the sculpture. So you don't, for instance, with this one, I wouldn't want to pour it directly onto the nose and then have it run down like a volcano, lava running out. You want to pour it at the bottom, and then it kind of fills up, and that helps the rubber find all the little nooks and crannies and fill it in. If it's pouring from the top, then gravity is pushing it, and it's more apt to get little bubbles and stuff. And you totally get bonus points if your clean clay mold ends up looking like a zombie teddy bear that just wants to hug you. He just wants to hug you. Hug me! Alright, so we're going to place it into the box.